So in the first part of the video, we were talking about what is meta. When a person comes and asks a forum or a streamer or on YouTube comments or whatever, you know, they want to know, like, what is the thing that everyone's doing? And occasionally you'll have people who, like, put the game down for a while and then they're coming back to it and they say, you know, well, what's meta now? And, well, it changes in between patches in terms of, you know, the weapons and whatnot. For example, Dark Souls 3, after the nerf to the Karthus curved sword, you didn't see it as often. Despite the fact that it's still a good weapon, it just wasn't the end-all be-all. Which is I think the complaint that a lot of people have with what is meta is it sort of limits, well, it doesn't limit, but it's basically a bunch of people playing a certain way. You know, just the most useful, the most, just the best min-max stat requirement kind of stuff that you can have. You know, that's what the meta is when they play like that. And a lot of people, it actually reminds me of like an old MMO RPG player. I used to, you know, play like MMOs way back in the day. And MMO servers always had different options for the servers you could join. And one of the servers was always the role-playing server, which is where you would get like 30-year-old virgins pretending to be elf maidens and that kind of like you know, wackadoo shit. But I think that, hopefully a little less cringy, but that is essentially the two camps of Dark Souls PvP dudes. There's the tryhards that do the min-maxing, and they'll all run basically the same build or like slight variations on the same build. And then there's the, I don't know what you would call them, casuals. Now I know there's like a weird stigma around the word casuals in Dark Souls. And honestly, I find that kind of ironic, because the casual player, like me, someone who runs, you know, like, they're not try-hard builds, they're fun-hard builds. Someone like me who runs a fun-hard build, I understand why shit's meta. I understand what is meta and why it is meta. I understand it. I get it. I just don't want to do it. It's boring to me. I don't like it. The people who are like me, which I assume is most of you guys in the YouTube and on Twitch, you guys that are like me and run these builds, you understand that I'm trying to sell you on a build that's fun, not a build that's Assault Manufacturer, Pincognito 1 Evo with this build. You know what I mean? But people make those sorts of YouTube videos for the real casuals who don't know that stuff, even if the real build isn't that great. And that's another thing. I'll just touch on this real quickly. I see a lot of comments where you guys are like, hey, I stole your build. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind at all, ever. I put my builds up here for a reason. You know, you guys are more than welcome to try them out. I think they're different. I think they're fun. And I encourage people to make fun, you know, make their builds fun. If you think my build looks fun, then absolutely go for it. That's a great starting point. You know, you can make your own builds, and you can sort of determine how meta, how min-maxy you want to get with it. For example, my Bloodborne skill build. You know, I gave this guy a touch of Blood Tinge just so I could use the Madaris whistle. And I only did that because it's fun. It's a fun little hunter's tool / spell. And, you know, but it's awful. I don't do any damage with the thing at all because I don't have the stats for it. You could cut that out. You could give this build more, you know, vitality or more skill and do more damage or more endurance or whatever you want, you know. And that's okay. If you take my builds, that's fine. That's why I put my builds up. I just, you know, they're fun. I have fun with them. If you're like me and it looks interesting to you, then give it a shot. Try it. It's fun. Fun. And that's something I want to talk about. Dark Souls 3, for those of you, most of you I assume, are Dark Souls 3 players that have followed me over to Dark Souls Remastered. And you guys in that time might have seen me play some Dark Souls 2 or some Bloodborne, and you guys know that I loved the Hunter's Tools, aka magic, in Bloodborne. I loved it. I went back and made a spellcaster in Dark Souls 2 because I'd never done it. And I did that after I played Dark Souls 1. And I did it because I was having so much fun with magic in Dark Souls 1. And in Dark Souls 2, I had fun with magic. And in Bloodborne, like I said, I had fun with magic. I did not have fun with magic in Dark Souls 3, like at all. Like, I am strictly a melee build kind of dude for the most part. I've made different builds. You know, I love the Moonlight Greatsword, so I'll always make a build for that weapon in any game. But I don't give the guy many spells when I make that build. Dark Souls 3 just has nothing to offer in terms of... And that's what's crazy. In Dark Souls 1, I'm learning there's no reason not to have some spells on your build. There's no reason. I took my Chaos dude to level 81 and gave him a shit ton of pyromancies. And oh my god! Like, first of all, it's fun as hell. And then second of all, those pyromancies are so useful. And then you guys have seen my meta level, soul level 120 build that uses Wrath of the Gods and Great Magic Barrier. And those spells are so fun and good and useful. Dark Souls 2, I had a blast playing with sorceries. Why did Dark Souls 3, like, just shit the bed on that? I'm not saying spells are useless in Dark Souls 3. I'm just saying they're not as fun, and there's not as many that are worth anything compared to Bloodborne, where, you know, there's only, what, like 10 spells? But each of the 10 is vastly different, just like the weapons in Bloodborne. You know, there's only, 25 weapons. Most of them are totally different from anything else that's in the game. The magic is the same way. But in Dark Souls 2, it feels like magic's the same way. In Dark Souls 1, it feels like magic is the same way. If you're playing Dark Souls 1 and you came from Dark Souls 3 and you're not enjoying it, and, you're still open to the idea of trying to enjoy it, put some spells on your build. And see if you don't like it better. I had no idea spells were that useful and that good. And coming from Dark Souls 3 and having never messed around with spells in Dark Souls 2, it never occurred to me that, spells in Dark Souls 1 are as good and as fun and as useful as the spells in Bloodborne. And then I went back and played Dark Souls 2 to sort of like, I guess reverse engineer the fun side of it. And yeah, the Dark Souls 2 spells are a blast. I had an awesome time. Soul Shower and Soul Vortex, and some of them aren't very good, but they're fun. They're a lot of fun. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is some of the changes that have happened over the course of whatever, from game to game. The fact that magic just got absolutely crapped on in Dark Souls 3, in terms of spells that are fun. All the miracles are just lightning spells, and all of them are garbage, except for Lightning Arrow. Divine Pillars of Light is like the closest thing to Gravelord Greatsword Dance. That spell's amazing. It's like Fire Tempest, or there's a few pyromancies that are similar to Fire Tempest, or Gravelord Sword Dance, or Gravelord Greatsword Dance. Those spells are all fun, they all do good damage, they all launch your opponent into the air. Fun stuff, and good stuff. And in Dark Souls 3, we have Divine Pillars of Light, and it's trash. It's trash. It does no damage. Does it knock your opponent into the air? Yes. Is that good in Dark Souls 3? No. And here's why. Here's another thing that changed. In Dark Souls 1, if I backstab you, I know everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people gripe about the chain backstabs. And I can understand that. But when you get backstabbed in Dark Souls 1, it's a big deal because it puts you on the ground. And that puts you at a huge disadvantage. Dark Souls 3 just lets you roll forever and you aren't in trouble anymore. And I don't like that as much. It feels sort of cheap. Like, I knocked you down. I earned that. I should be able to take advantage of it. That should put me in a position to, be able to take advantage of the fact that you're prone, but I can't because it's Dark Souls 3, and you can just roll a million times and get away from me, and knocking you on your ass did nothing to help me in any way, shape, or form. Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne and Dark Souls 2 will let you knock your opponent on their ass with big weapons, too. Dark Souls 3 did away with that, for the most part, except for, like, fully charged R2s. And, a few of the weapon arts. And as much like the Stomp launch with the Zweihander, those Ultra Greatswords, the Lothric Knight Greatsword has that Stomp launch. I love that. I've always said that's one of my, that's the reason I got into poise and figuring out how poise operates. And that's the reason I started putting out poise videos, because people in Dark Souls 3 just didn't take the time to understand it. And it was all just because of that one attack. But if you put something like that in Dark Souls 1, or I'm sorry, if you pull that off in Dark Souls 1, if you knock somebody in the air and knock them on their ass, they're in a world of hurt. So, nerfing chain backstabs accidentally nerfed the get-up game, the guessing game that takes place when you knock someone on their ass in Dark Souls 1, when you knock somebody down and you put yourself in this position to win. There's consequences there. And I know a lot of people don't like that Dark Souls it doesn't feel fast-paced compared to Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3. But it feels like there's actual consequences to your actions. In terms of, like, everything that happens in the fight, there's actions and consequences to it. And the consequence to nerfing the get-up game is ultra great weapons and spells are now nerfed. They're not as good because rolls are just better than them. Now, does that mean that I think that Dark Souls 1 is the best PvP or that it's perfect or anything like that? No. There's certain things that, like, I think an Ultra Greatsword having an infinite stun lock, I'm fine with that. Because it's hard to hit somebody with an Ultra Greatsword in any Souls game, period. Except maybe Bloodborne. But in Dark Souls 1, you get hit with an Ultra Greatsword, the Zweihander, the Greatsword. You get stuck in that infinite stun lock that those two weapons have. Most of the other Greatswords, actually, the Ultra Greatswords, most of them actually operate at a different swing speed. They have slightly longer recovery frames in between attacks, which means that there's no infinite stun lock on those. Like the Black Knight Greatsword, for example, or the Demon Machete. I kind of like it, the infinite stun lock. And yeah, you have to learn how to toggle escape, but that's no big deal. Watch some OGs play Dark Souls PvP, and you'll see them casting spells and preemptively toggling. It's the level of get in there and play the game that other Dark Souls games don't have. But then, let's look at something like the Gold Tracer or the Falchion. And why on earth is the stun lock on a weapon like that good? It's not infinite, but it's long enough, and it does enough damage, especially the Gold Tracer, it'll just bleed you out. Even if you toggle it and dodge backwards, there's a good chance you're going to get hit anyway, again. And that's why those weapons, work so well. The basis of Ouroboros' Dark Moonblade Falchion is the Falchion swings right to left, then left to right at such a weird... it's so fast, it's got the stun lock. 2, it has a hitbox slightly to its sides, so you'll get a lot of backstab cancels doing that. And then 3, if you slap Dark Moonblade or a buff on it, it does a shit ton of damage. Gold Tracer, on the other hand, bleeds you out and does a shit ton of damage. That's classic Ouroboros, taking advantage of what the system gives him. But that's one thing that I don't like that about Dark Souls 1, you know what I mean? The fact that, I take advantage of it too. I'm not trying to be like a hypocrite here. When I spawn in, sometimes I'll just spawn in straight with a Falchion. Because if there's spawn campers on me, the Falchion, or God bless you, Mr. I Won't Forget, and God bless you, Martyrs Brigade, for putting up the Battle of the Builds, the Hand Axe on the Strength build does the same thing. Just ridiculous stun lock, ridiculous stagger, and very, very good damage on top of it. The idea of Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne and Dark Souls 2 PvP, the idea that they nerfed poise a little bit and made spacing so much more important. I like that. I hate the 2-hit stun lock mechanic. I really do. But when I look at Dark Souls 1, I see so many people just get in my face. I can, like, I'll have a Silver Knight Spear and I'll be fighting a Demon Spear, and, you know, I'll outspace them 9 times out of 10 or whatever, you know. And in those fights, it feels like it matters. But in other fights, people will just Havel up or Giant up, you know, they'll wear the big armor, and they'll get right in your face and just attack with impunity, because they know you can't interrupt them with, you know, a finesse weapon, something like a dex weapon, like something like a, you know. And I know people will say, well, you know, those kind of weapons shouldn't be able to you know, knock down, or they shouldn't be able to stagger somebody wearing Havels or something like that. And I get that, and maybe the balance was never found between Dark Souls 2, because I don't like Dark Souls 2's poise system all that much either. I obviously don't like Dark Souls 3 poise system all that much, because it's too slow, and fast weapons reign supreme. So yeah, they've just never found that balance. But I know for a fact that when I play Bloodborne, or when I play Dark Souls 3, or when I play Dark Souls 2, I good and goddamn well better know how long my weapon is, and I better know latency. And you know, people call it phantom range. That's latency. That's on my screen. You're still close to me, you know. But the idea that in Dark Souls 2, 3, and Bloodborne, the fact that, like, hey, who knows their weapon better? I like that better than just, I can just get in your face and hit you. And if I get in your face and you hit me, I can just backstab you for hitting me. I don't see how that rewards the more skilled play. It just rewards the more number crunchy play. But that's the meta. That broken whatever. That's, you know what I mean? That's the meta thing. Now that doesn't mean you can't have fights where spacing is important and stuff like that in Dark Souls 1. Far from it. I'm just saying, when you invade somebody, you know, and you see them meta'd out in terms of armor and their weapon, don't expect them to do anything other than the tactic that would help them win with the least amount of resistance. Which, you know, I think that is probably a lot of people's problem with Dark Souls 1. Regardless of whether or not you win or lose, sometimes those fights, if you're like me, they just don't, you know what I mean? Like, they don't feel as good as the fights where other things mattered. And, you know, I get that. But, as I have stated, I love all these games. And, you know, even the broken parts and everything else. I come away appreciating how broken each one of these games is, and so I don't, you know, complain and say, well, that one's broken and I don't like it, because they're all broken. They're all broken. What you decide to, you know, if you decide to stick with one and give it a shot or not, at this point, I think the community is pretty much spoken. So I'm done. You've got my 2 cents. I'll play any of these games. If there's PvP in it, I will play it forever, and I don't care how it's broken. I enjoy the idea of going into another player's game and affecting their playthrough. That's fun. It's a very special thing that this whole series of videos that I've put out, I've just been, you know, trying to preach that, and I feel like I nailed it. I'm the best. I hope you enjoyed the series. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll be in the comments. Later, y'all.